Welcome to the It's Elementary podcast hosted by Dr. David Watson and me, Dr. Jessica Lagrone. This is a podcast about exploring theological curiosity where we talk to interesting people and explore topics that come through Asbury Theological Seminary here in Wilmore, Kentucky.
Hey everyone, and welcome to It's Elementary with Dr. Watson. I'm David Watson, and I am here with my old friend, Bill Arnold.
Hello, Dr. Watson.
Great to be with you. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
It's a great honor.
I'm sorry to say that we're missing the amazing Jessica Lagrone. Jessica couldn't be here today. She had to be with the GMC Connectional Council in Spain, and she thought that was more important than recording this podcast. So hopefully she's back in the USA, but we don't know yet.
So instead of the rose between two thorns, today they just get the two thorns.
That's it, you and me. It's going to be a thorny conversation.
Right.
So you are the Paul S. Amos Professor of Old Testament Interpretation at Asbury Theological Seminary.
That's right.
And how long have you been a professor at Asbury?
I've been here for 30 years. Hard to say that out loud, but
Yeah.
I came in 1995. I'm in my 31st year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you had also been a student at Asbury before that, right?
Yeah, I was a student back when the earth was still cooling, and John Wesley was just a little boy. Yeah. The statue wasn't nearly as tall as it is now. I was a student here from 77 to 1980. I graduated in 1980 with an MDiv.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you had a good experience as a student, obviously, because you came back.
Oh, this was where I wanted to be. I taught in two other seminaries after my graduate studies, and they were great. I enjoyed teaching in the other places, but Asbury was always the dream place for me. So I was thrilled to come back in '95. Yeah.
And who was your favorite professor?
Oh. You can't ask me that question.
Who were some of your favorite
Some of my
professors?
favorite professors.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. John Oswalt was my mentor when I was here.
Okay.
And there's a long story about why that is. But also, I learned so much from Bob Traina and from Al Coppage and from Bob Lyon and David Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
I could go on. They were just great teachers and mentors. They shaped me really in terms of the work that I do. And the older I get, the more I realize how much the seminary shaped my thinking, gave me a deep and profound appreciation for what it means to be a Methodist.
Yeah.
Ken Kinghorn, I didn't mention him, when I took classes on Wesley and history of Methodism.
Yeah.
So, every day, the work that I do, the teaching that I do, the writing that I do, it's really been shaped by my time here as a student. Asbury taught me how to read the Bible, and I was reflecting recently with someone who's a colleague here about our friends in the guild who are also biblical scholars and writing biblical commentaries and doing biblical work. There's a certain advantage I think we have about the way we learned first hermeneutics and how to read and exegete the Bible. That it's amazing because our graduate work often is very technical and language and history driven.
Yeah.
But we brought to that work already a well-formed, shaped hermeneutic on how to read the Bible, and it's just really important.
Does that relate to something that's kind of a distinctive of Asbury, which is inductive Bible study?
Exactly. We called it English Bible in those days.
Okay.
Which didn't mean to say you shouldn't read Greek and Hebrew. It meant to say that this is the vernacular of the language we're using in our culture, and that's how you study the Bible first before you go deeper into the languages. Now we call it inductive biblical studies because it's a little bit more accurate to call it that.
And a lot of people that are outside of Asbury networks don't know what inductive Bible study is. Can you describe that a little bit more deeply?
Yeah, most seminaries would simply call that hermeneutics, the science of interpretation.
Okay.
But one of the things that's distinctive about what we do here is that we begin with the vernacular, the common English language that we all are using here, and we say we want first-hand encounter with that text. So all inductive biblical studies means initially, it means a lot, and Dr. Bauer could go on and on about this.
Yeah.
But we want encounters with the text personally, instead of just going through the commentaries and other resources to tell you what the text means.
Mm-hmm.
We think And it has to do with our Wesleyan heritage as a means of grace. We think the reader needs to encounter Jesus through the message of the text. We always say, you want to have the experience with God that the authors of Scripture had with God.
Yeah.
And how you do that is by firsthand direct interaction with the text.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not distinctive. There are other places that talk about such things, but not quite as intentionally as we do that here.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, and I think it is helpful to teach people to read the Bible in the vernacular. I mean, I have a degree in New Testament, and obviously I think the biblical languages are important, and yet at the same time, the vast majority of people reading the Bible throughout the world are reading in their own language.
Right.
And so if we can't read the Bible for its purposes in that way, then I think we're in trouble.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Good. You're not just a scholar, you're a churchman, you're a dedicated churchman, and you're a global Methodist, right?
I am.
Yeah. And we served together for 10 years
Yeah.
on the University Senate
Yes, we did.
when we were both United Methodists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was something.
That was something. That was
Because
a thing, yes.
you're only supposed to serve for a maximum of 8 years.
Right, 2 terms.
But the UMC wouldn't hold a general conference, and so we served an extra 2 years.
We did.
Yeah.
We have done our terms plus.
No one could say we weren't dedicated.
Longest serving senators in the history of the University Senate.
Well, I actually resigned before you did.
I think the year before.
You have a longer tenure.
You
on
had a
there
little
than
more
I
iron
did.
in your spine than I did, I think.
Well,
You don't have to go further.
Yeah.
We don't have to talk about that. It was
Yeah.
good. I mean, what we did was good work, and
it
it was good
was.
to work together in that setting.
And I will say that we worked with some really good people
We did.
during that
Great
time.
people.
And I don't, as difficult as that work was at times, I don't want in any way to denigrate the people that we worked
Right.
with, who by and large were very fair-minded,
Mhm.
and good folks.
Yeah.
So when I was a grad student, one of the first colloquies that the very first colloquy actually that I ever went to was with Stanley Hauerwas.
Mm.
And he was visiting from Duke, and there was a professor there, and she was asking a question, and she said, "I teach Hebrew Bible," and he cut her off mid-sentence, and he said, "Are you a Christian?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Then why do you call it the Hebrew Bible? It's the Old Testament."
Right.
And she said, "Well, it's written in Hebrew, so I call it the
Yeah.
Hebrew Bible." And I was brand new to the academic world. I was
Mm.
like, "Oh, this is how academics talk to each other." And I was glad to
Right.
know that's not
Well, it
always
is
the
at times.
case. Yeah. But also that was just very Stanley Hauerwas
Mhm.
too. So I use the term Old Testament
Sure.
when I talk about that segment of the canon. What do you use, Old Testament or Hebrew Bible?
Well, you introduced me by saying my title is the Paul S.
Right.
Amos Professor of Old Testament
Yeah.
Interpretation.
Yeah.
So I use Old Testament in almost every context. And, I have a book coming out in February, which is written with a secular press.
Yeah.
And even there it's called Introduction to the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of convention. If you ask a person on the street who's not a Christian, never been exposed to these things, they'll know what the Old Testament is for the
Right.
most part.
Right.
But they would be very confused by the expression Hebrew Bible. So there are very good reasons beyond being a Christian where you
Right.
would use it as a convention. The term Hebrew Bible I use occasionally in the academic world as a means of respect for the setting. I certainly don't use it frequently, and in most of my work, I don't refer to the Hebrew Bible. And there's several reasons for that. First of all, it's misleading because there are 10 chapters of the Old Testament written in Aramaic.
Yeah.
So by calling it the Hebrew Bible, that's already a bit of a problem.
So you'd have to call it the Hebrew and Aramaic Bible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is not going to work.
No, you can't ignore 10 chapters.
It's in Daniel, 6 in Daniel and 4 in Ezra. Those are
Yeah.
great chapters. And beyond that, if you use the word Hebrew, which is a language for the most part, to describe the Bible, then where do you stop? There's a Greek Bible, there's an Aramaic Bible, there's a
Right.
Syriac Bible, there's a Latin Bible. What are you accomplishing by doing that?
Yeah.
So it's an adequate term on its own. I only use it in certain academic settings out of respect for other people who feel that it's a strictly Christian reading to call it the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that, David, is that, I went to 2 seminaries. I have a degree from here, but my PhD is from a Jewish seminary.
Hebrew Union
College in
Right.
Cincinnati is where my degree is from. And so I learned a lot about showing respect for that culture. And what's intriguing, though, about Hebrew Union College and most Reformed Jewish friends is that they'll call it the Old Testament. They want me to be thoroughly Christian. So they'll respect me by calling it the Old Testament.
Right.
So in turn, I often will respect them by calling it the Tanakh, the Hebrew word for the Old Testament, or Hebrew Bible in an academic setting. So for the most part, I use Old Testament. You're right. It's a certain confessional statement to call it that. These are not just the scriptures of early Judaism and later Judaism. They're also our scriptures. And so by calling them that, we're making a confession about the way the New Testament relates to the Old.
And so let's drill down into that a little bit, that confessional aspect of that leads us to use the language of Old Testament rather than Hebrew Bible. How do you understand that?
Well, it comes from the New Testament itself, and Tertullian, who first called it the Old Testament. It also has some inadequacies, because if it's old, in some minds that means outdated, and it has been replaced by something new.
So you're saying that old can give the impression of like a supersessionist theology.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, John Goldingay, a fine scholar, refers to the First Testament and the Second Testament. I've chosen not to do that because that implies there's a Third Testament. So that's also inadequate.
Right. The Book of Mormon.
Yeah, right. Well, we're not going to go there. So Old Testament's the best way to refer to it. So again, the New Testament refers to it that way, refers to it as Israel's Scriptures or as the Scriptures. Sometimes I'll refer to it as the Scriptures because that's what the New Testament calls them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of the relationship between them, it's complex, as you know. I tell people
that's why you're here, Bill. You've got to unravel this knot for us.
So I always try to be careful. I tell people it's the theological foundation and the historical background of the New. So by historical background, there's absolutely no way to understand the New Testament unless we know something of the historical background provided in the Old. It's also the theological foundation of the New. Most of the New Testament doesn't explain the great doctrines of the church. The doctrine of atonement is not really spelled out very carefully in the New Testament. It's assumed. It's spelled out in Leviticus, in the opening chapters of Leviticus. The New Testament assumes you've read that and that you know that well. So it's a theological foundation. You have to know something of that. But I'm always nervous to leave it there because the Old Testament also, we believe, has its own innate, inspired authority.
Yes.
So if you call it background and foundation, that almost implies that it's there to serve the New Testament, but actually, no, that's not the way it worked. I think of, I just realized I could think about the story of, this is getting into your section of the canon, is it Philip who's on his road after the festival, and he meets an Ethiopian in the chariot.
The Ethiopian eunuch.
And the Ethiopian eunuch is reading Isaiah.
Yeah.
And Philip says, well, do you understand what you're reading? And he has 2 words there in Greek. One's understand, one is read. Mm-hmm. And he was reading it out loud, and Philip says, do you understand it? Uses a different Greek word there, anagnosko. Do you really understand what you're reading out loud? Well, that's the Old Testament. Philip explained it to him, and immediately he says, I need to find water here. I need to be baptized.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So the power of Isaiah, that one passage in Isaiah, had its own innate authority and power in the life of the Ethiopian, and he was baptized.
But he had to have someone to interpret, right?
Exactly.
He had to reach the fullness of understanding about it.
Right.
And so the Old Testament is scripture in its own right.
Yes.
It's not simply background, theological or historical background for the New Testament. And yet there is, for the purposes of interpretation, we have to have the entire story, which is the Old and New Testament together.
I think you've got it, Dr. Watson.
Yeah.
This is elementary, Dr. Watson. I think you've got it.
So you'd agree with that then?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
And I, when I talk to my students about it, I always say it's all one story, right? It's this great narrative of salvation.
Right.
If you watch a movie, if you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark or Star Wars and you stop 3/4 of the way through,
Right.
you're not going to get to the part.
It's more than 3/4, 77%.
Thank you. To be exact.
Right. Not to be exact, it's 77.3%.
Okay. But, you've got to get to the part where they blow up the Death Star.
Right. Or they open up the ark.
They open up the ark.
Die,
right. If you don't get to that part,
then you miss
come
the
on.
point.
Yeah.
Right.
So Kevin Van Hooser, has an article where he talks about the Bible is a library of books, but it's also a single book. It's
Right.
He uses the language of a work. The Bible is a work.
Yep.
And so you have this narrative arc of creation, fall, redemption, and new creation.
Yep.
And you have to have the whole story in order to get that narrative
Right.
arc.
Right. I like the book analogy. In my books coming out in February, I talk about the Old Testament as a library, and the first half of it is the first floor, and that's the primary history from Genesis to 2 Kings. And the second floor of the library is where you get all the poetry, the Psalms, prophets, and all the other books that go with it. I also would say I use a little bit of hyperbole at times when I say this, and I don't know how you'll receive this, David, but I tell students that there's nothing new in the New Testament. What's new about the New Testament? And there have been times when I used to teach Old Testament introduction a long time ago, where I would have the students just shout out all the great doctrines of the church, just have them brainstorm about what are the doctrines of the church. I'd write them all on the board, cover the board with everything you can think of as a standard Orthodox doctrine.
Right.
And then I would ask where in the canon it's taught. And invariably, they think they have me stumped on certain things like incarnation or Trinity or whatever, but I can show them that almost every single thing that they treasure as an Orthodox truth is first taught in the Old Testament and assumed in the New. And there's something, there are some new expressions in the New Testament, and there's a new form of incarnation, of course, that makes it new. And Jeremiah and Ezekiel both talk about a new covenant. So there is that fulfillment of the new covenant in what we call the New Testament. But is it really new? As you say, it's one story.
Yeah. It is, but the fullness of expression of that story, right, you don't get to until you don't begin to get to until you hit Matthew, right?
Right.
I mean, because we were talking about hermeneutics earlier, the interpretive method. I mean, so much of the interpretive key to understanding the fullness of Scripture comes in the New Testament.
Right.
So,
the New Testament is like a movie that ends in expectation. It's like the last prophets, which in the Christian Bible are put in the last of the Old Testament. It's as though they're looking into the distance. They're trying to see there's a coming Messiah, and we thought a number of them were. We thought Hezekiah. We thought Josiah was the Messiah. We thought Hezekiah was the Messiah. They've turned out to be disappointments. But we know that there's another one coming, and so the Old Testament ends like this. It's looking. And Matthew comes along and says, here he is. And Matthew especially using, I think Matthew must have been written in Hebrew or Aramaic or something. It's written in such a way as to match exactly that expectation of the Old Testament, to say this is now fulfilled in that moment.
Hezekiah in particular is disappointing.
Disappointing.
Isn't he?
He
He's just
started
like,
so well.
As long as I have peace in my lifetime, I'm fine. My kids,
they'll
be carried off and made eunuchs. But
but I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm good. So, at some point, these kids have to grow up and take responsibility for their own lilives.
The tragedy of that, too, is that, especially in the book of 2 Kings, he's described so often as one with batach. He believed, he trusted. He trusted in Adonai, in the Lord. I mean, he's characterized as a man of real faith and trust almost all the way through the end until, he entertains these visitors from Babylonia.
Yeah.
And the prophet says,
he's like, look at all this great stuff
look what
I
I've got.
have.
And the prophet says, what are you doing? Yeah, that was a bad decision.
Yeah. Hey, want to see my collection of gigantic gold stuff?
How would this look in your living room?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that was not so great.
No.
But so he wasn't the Messiah,
No.
which is for the best in retrospect.
Yeah.
You have a new book coming out, The Cambridge Introduction to the Old Testament. We've
Yes,
touched
thank
on
you.
that
Thank
a
you.
little bit. This is not a specifically Christian introduction.
Right.
So talk a little bit about why you wrote that. What do you want to accomplish with that?
Well, that's such an interesting question, and there's some psychology involved in answering that question. I don't know why we write sometimes the things we write, David. I was invited to do it. I had done other things for Cambridge University Press. I co-authored a grammar. I had done a commentary for them, and so the editor in New York City, which they have a U.S. office, has asked me to consider this. And I'd already co-authored a specifically Christian introduction for college students.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was, what about, this is a secular press, what about writing a textbook for any young person, whether they're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or secularist, who thinks they're secularist,
Mm-hmm.
In order to show the continuing, perduring value of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament.
Right.
So the first parts of the book explain the term Old Testament and why we use that, and what are the other terms that are available for it. But the objective is to show that the understanding, Israel's understanding of God, I start out by saying what you think about God has implications for everything else in your life, even if you don't think about God very often.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thinks about God
That's
some.
very Tozer. That's very
right.
A.W. Tozer.
Yeah, I wish I could say I got that from him. I don't remember. Maybe I did.
Okay.
It's been a long time ago. But everybody thinks about God,
Yeah.
even if they think they don't believe he exists.
Okay.
What you think about God has huge implications for everything else. And the majority of the time, it's almost a certainty that whatever you do think about God has some origins in the Old Testament. And wars have been fought even in recent history, so that every young person in university needs to have some awareness of the significance, the perduring value of the Old Testament, what it means in life today, in the world today, what it means in the Muslim world today. And most likely people sitting next to them came from churches or synagogues where it had some value, some faith value. So it goes through, introduces the different sections of the books in the library of the Old Testament and tries to show not just, content and background in each book, but what contribution did that book make to Israel's understanding of who God is?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot in this book about monotheism, what monotheism is and what it isn't. And just on a word on that, I would say, I tell people that the Old Testament in many places assumes that Israel must have a relationship with one God without denying the existence of others. So it actually is not less than monotheism, it's more than monotheism. It's saying, not only are we not going to talk about the other gods, you can't even think about them. You can't worship them. You can't, whether or not it's not about math. They don't say there aren't other gods. The first two commandments are, I'm the one who saved you out of Egypt. You can't have any other gods.
Right.
So it assumes those other gods are out there and they're tempting to you, but you can't even think about them.
Isn't that called henotheism?
Henotheism, it's sometimes called henotheism, which is a technical way of saying only one God. But that really is used to describe only one God that you worship. Another term that's often used is monolatry. Instead of monotheism, monolatry is the worship of only one God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really not less than monotheism. It's actually more. The Old Testament message is more than simply talking about which gods don't exist.
Right.
It's talking about what kind of relationship do you have with the one God who saved you?
The Bible is it goes back and forth a little bit on what these other gods are, right? Because, for example, sometimes in the prophetic literature, we read that they're just blocks of wood,
Right.
or pieces of stone. Paul seems sometimes to think about these as demons and kind of connects them with the powers and principalities
Right.
and all that stuff. And
Right.
how did they think about that most commonly in the ancient Near East, like the ancient Israelites, I guess?
Well, the way you ask the question first has to be where I start with the ancient Near East,
Yeah.
where they thought of tiered gods. They almost always had a pyramid of 3 great gods and then gods under that. And they also had concepts of demons
Yeah.
and preternatural beings who weren't quite God, but they also weren't humans. They were in that, liminal space between humanity and the deities. So this was all a temptation to Israel. I
Mhm.
mean, this was the air they breathed, the culture all around them in Mesopotamia and in Egypt. Everybody, I mean, there was no such thing as atheism until the incarnation. Jesus is why people came up with the idea of atheism. There was no such thing. Everybody
Wait,
believed in the deity.
Jesus is why people came up with
The-
atheism.
yes.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that.
Well, in the ancient world, it's probably a slight overstatement, but they didn't really think about no gods.
Right.
Everyone
was religious. In some
Everybody
way.
had many gods, and you had
Yeah.
to worship the gods of your national identity, but also your family and your smaller, the ones in your sock drawer, the little idols in your sock drawer that took care of you and your family.
Right.
Lots of gods. It's hard to be an ancient Near Eastern person. Lots of gods to keep happy.
Yeah.
So when the Israelites came into Canaan, there's a lot that we could talk about here, David. So I don't know.
Let's go for it.
Well, the problem was every time a Semitic group came into another land, they always were enamored with the religion being practiced there. And I could illustrate this many times over with the Babylonians coming into Mesopotamia. They always out-Babylonized whoever was there before them and would worship the gods that they had. So the Israelites are coming in from the desert into a very high civilization with a very tiered number of gods that they worshiped. And in their system, you had to depend upon those gods to bring rain off the Mediterranean and to give you productivity, to enrich your farms, to give you children and your families. That's the storm god, and you know him as Baal.
Yeah.
So the Israelites were told, you're going into this land. This land is wonderful. It flows with milk and honey. You don't even have to work it. It's just going to gush with all kinds of goodness unless you depend on Baal for it.
Right.
So in terms of the ancient Near East, that had never happened before. All these peoples that would come into a different area would merely adopt over time. They would acquiesce to the deities that were in that culture. And the Israelites were told, you cannot do that.
Right.
This will never work if you merge Yahweh with Baal, rather. And so that's why the Elijah-Elisha cycle in the books of Kings are so important.
But back to the Jesus is the reason for
Right.
atheism question.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm still not tracking.
Okay. So as I say, it might be an overstatement, but I think in the Greco-Roman world, similarly, everybody believed in multiple deities.
Mm-hmm.
The question of whether it's possible to live life without a deity was something that
no one
didn't
considered.
occur to people. But when you had a radical idea like one God becoming human flesh, the first Christians were accused of being atheists.
Yeah, they were. Yeah,
So
because they didn't worship the gods of the
They didn't
pantheon.
worship Christianity had to say, well, those other gods don't exist. And Greco-Romans said, what?
Yeah.
That makes you an atheist. It's
Mhm.
ironic.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I would make that
Yeah,
statement.
okay.
The idea
Yeah.
of this radical concept of incarnation
Yeah.
is what eventuated in the concept of atheism.
Yeah. Okay. People worshipped multiple gods. They
Yeah.
adopted the gods of the lands that they went into, and Yahweh says, "No, you can't do that anymore." But Israel did. It seems a lot, right?
Right.
Where is it kind of the instrumental nature of these other gods that tempted them? For example, Baal as a storm god. In an agrarian economy, you kind of want to curry the favor of the storm god.
You have to, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they came in with a desert god. Yahweh, what did he know about raising crops in Canaan?
Mm-hmm.
He can't help you. Just imagine the cultural pressure. You're the newcomers, and you've brought in your worship of one God. You only worship the one, and you met him at a mountain in the desert, right? Now you've learned that, hey, he saved you from bondage. He's the one, and he fed you manna, and he fed you quail in the desert. He kept you alive. He gave you water from rocks. But now you can hear the cultural pressure. Well, that was the desert.
Yeah.
You folks don't understand where you are now. You're in
Yeah.
a very sophisticated setting.
Yeah.
You think you're going to raise crops?
Yeah.
So what happened was they thought, well, having a little Baal statue in the back of my sock drawer won't hurt.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and worship God as I'm taught by the prophets, but I'll also, make sure
You got to cover your bases.
you got to cover the bases
Yeah.
and make sure that like my crops are going to grow next year. And after all, I mean, what does Yahweh know about raising crops in Canaan?
But that's the background of the Elijah story, right?
Right.
Where Yahweh stops the rain,
Right.
not Baal.
Right.
And Baal can't make the rain come
Right.
back.
Eliyahu, Elijah's name is my God is Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
So Eliyahu, my God is Yahweh, shows up and he says, it's not going to rain anymore until I say so. Well, that's spoken into a culture where Baal provides the water. And again, you can imagine yourself, you've had dinner with your family and it's a warm spring day and you do what you do in that part of the world. You go outside on the steps up to the roof of your house and you lounge around on the rooftop and you're talking because there's nothing good on Netflix to watch and you're talking about the day and whatever. And all of a sudden you feel a breeze and you see a cloud coming off the Mediterranean toward you. And then you hear thunder and you've been taught, the whole culture around you says, well, that's Baal beating his drum,
Mhm.
and there's lightning. That's his that's Baal's thunderbolt.
Mm-hmm.
So you think, wow, that's impressive. My fathers and mothers stood at the foot of Mount Sinai and they heard a voice, but that's been a long time ago. Look at that storm. That's a powerful sign of Baal, and he's going to bring water, and he's going to provide the growth in my farm.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd better pay attention to what these Canaanites around me are saying.
Mm-hmm.
That was the danger. So
Yeah.
Elijah says, not going to happen until I say so.
Right.
And they have drought, 3 years
Yeah.
of drought, and then, that doesn't end well.
No, it doesn't end well. Not for the prophets
Not
of
for the
Baal.
prophets of Baal, that's right.
It didn't work out well for them. What do you think the biggest differences are between writing for Christian audiences and writing for secular audiences, or just a broader audience, right?
Yeah. I think keeping in mind my objective when I did this book for Cambridge, my objective was not to lay out the 4 spiritual laws or to get into Christian doctrine, but the objective was to show what is the value of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And
you're answering a different question.
And yes.
Yeah.
And I also found value in saying, by the way, to get to the value of the Old Testament, we really have to understand what the Israelites thought about God.
Yeah.
Well, there's some gospel in that.
Yeah, there is.
There's a
Yeah.
lot. There was an opportunity to say, this is how they saw him. You may think that the Old Testament's all about war and gore and blood and violence, but there's some beautiful text there that I was able to talk about God's passion for Israel, and through Israel, his passion for all of humanity, and what the message of the prophets was for all of humanity. So there's a lot of that. But I also love writing. So I'm writing commentary on Deuteronomy, and it's specifically a Christian context. And I love the freedom of being able to tie things in with the New Testament and with the early church, and to being able to show what I believe will be, areas where the book of Deuteronomy, in this case, makes real contributions to our understanding of who we are as Christians.
Yeah. When I was a PhD student, I did some teaching in a state-funded community college, and I couldn't teach confessionally, because I had to teach from a completely secularist kind of perspective.
Right.
That was what was required. I mean, it's a state-funded institution, right? And I didn't like that.
Right. It's hard.
I didn't like it because I didn't think that I could tell the whole truth about the Bible, and that's kind of what I struggled with at that time. Because I think when you're writing or you're teaching out of kind of a secular context, there are certain questions you can answer, and you can answer well, and there is a certain value in making the Bible available to people who aren't believers, right?
Right.
Right. But then like you said, you like to tie the Bible in the Old Testament into the New Testament. You like to
Hmm.
tie it into the teaching of the early church, the fathers, and these kinds of things. And I think there's a fullness of expression
Right.
you can get to when you're writing confessionally, that you can't
Right.
otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. It's actually hard to write for a secular setting in which you also feel compelled to say, well, look, this is the message of the Old Testament. And there's power in that message. As we said earlier, it has its own innate authority. It's an authoritative word. I was thinking as you were saying that, David, we have a student, she graduated with her PhD here recently, went back to China, Molly Yi, who's one of my students. Her testimony is that she was in a secular university in China where the class she was taking was about the religions of the world. And of course, this is a atheistic or agnostic setting.
Right.
And the teacher simply was explaining what Buddhism teaches and what Hinduism teaches and what Islam teaches. And they came to Christianity, and the teacher wasn't a believer, but the teacher just spelled out what Christianity teaches. And Molly's testimony is that she put her head on her desk and felt compelled to say, this is truth.
Mhm.
There's something
Wow.
in this that's
Wow.
truth. She wound up at Asbury and became a student here.
That's
And now
amazing.
she's back teaching at a large church and doing some teaching. So it's what you're saying. She's now teaching some in a state university as an adjunct. And, I have friends who teach in that setting, and I have to say, I respect what they do. They have to teach the truth of this word
Yeah.
without making a confession on their own. And at the
Right.
same time, say, by my life,
Yeah.
by my presence here,
Yeah.
I'm here to have coffee and talk about this, however they can say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a different kind of ministry than you and I are used to doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It
And I
is.
honor it,
Yeah. Of
but
course.
it's hard. It
Yeah.
would be a hard
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. It was difficult for me, and I do respect people who can do that work. That's not what I'm called to, but it is.
I hope so now that you're here.
Yeah. Yeah.
As president of Asbury
Well, I've been
Seminary.
meaning to tell you. No. Yeah. It is a different way in which you have to approach the text. What about people who just want to get started reading? When people say, where should I start reading the Bible? A lot of times people say, well, read Matthew,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
read John.
Read John, yeah.
What about people who say, I've started in the Old Testament and I struggled. I
Right,
started in
right.
Genesis. It was good
Stopped
for
at
a while.
Leviticus, right?
Yeah, right.
It was good for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, it's good for a while, but then so-and-so begat so-and-so
Right.
begat so-and-so, and I was just bored and I quit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where's a good place to start for people who
Yeah.
want to really try to expand their reading of the Old Testament?
It's harder to give advice on where to dip into the Old Testament, and I think it would have to depend on a case-by-case basis with the person. If the person has a good understanding of the New Testament, I would say, start with Genesis and understand that when you get to the begats.
Yeah.
Well, I went to Leviticus, but you were already in Genesis 5. I mean, it happens quick, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Leviticus is where you learn about atonement and about forgiveness of sin.
Mhm.
So
But you probably don't want to.
you don't want to start there. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where
like starting
Orthodox
in
Jews
2
start with Leviticus
Chronicles.
1. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a good
yeah.
place to start, but not for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think, if they're familiar with some of the great stories, they might want to start with Samuel and Kings and read the stories of Saul and David and Goliath and
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know. But I also think if they're a Christian and they have some understanding, they've read Matthew or John, they could start with Genesis 12 and read about Abraham and learn about the growth of Abraham and his that whole Abraham narrative from 12 to 25 is all about a commensurate growth of Abraham's faith with his knowledge of who Yahweh is, who God is. And the more he learned of God's character, the more he was able to make commitments to God, and it sort of escalated. That's an illustration of spiritual formation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if a person could start there and stick with some of the tough passages of that narrative,
Yeah. Yeah.
that might be a good place. But then also the beautiful passages in Isaiah. You could start with all the poems in 2nd Isaiah. Those are beautiful ways to dip into the Old Testament too. Or the Psalms, of course.
Yeah, I was going to
you
suggest
start with
maybe the Psalms. Yeah.
familiar Psalms. And also, some of the Psalms have a more immediate intimacy with readers. than Leviticus would. So maybe that would be a good answer too.
Yeah, yeah. Probably not Ecclesiastes.
Probably wouldn't
that
start there.
They get
No.
depressed.
I love Ecclesiastes.
I do too.
There's something
but-
about my personality. I just what is this all about? I mean, why
Yeah,
are we
come
even here?
on.
It's all
It's all-
vapor and it's a breath. It's here today and gone tomorrow. Oh, but there is faith. At the very end, it's pulled back
a little.
a little, but you have to get to chapter 12.
That's why you need the whole
You
canon.
do need the whole canon.
Yeah, I always felt like Ecclesiastes was a good kind of counterbalance to Proverbs, right?
Yeah.
Because Proverbs is all like, hey,
Yeah.
just be righteous,
Right.
and it's going
Yes.
to be awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
You know?
Just stay
And
away from
Ecclesiastes
certain
is
things.
like, okay, slow your roll there,
Yeah.
bud. You
It's going to be terrible.
You
It's,
know?
life is short.
Right. Like I've seen good people and they just
Yeah.
die for
Doesn't
no reason.
count to anything,
And yeah. So you kind of need both. And that's one of the beauties
Yeah,
of the canon.
That's true.
You know, that James Sanders, talked about the great canonical critic,
Right.
James Sanders,
Yeah.
talked
Yeah.
a lot about
Hebrew
that.
Union College graduate.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. His books, I think, Torah and Canon,
Mm-hmm.
and is it Canon and Community?
I think that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are very helpful reads, I think.
Yeah, I
for,
agree.
if you want to get to kind of to understand the significance of canon.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So I haven't kept up with what's going on in the world of Old Testament studies. When I was in seminary, we were taught the documentary hypothesis.
yeah.
And so the documentary hypothesis is essentially the Pentateuch consists of these different sources that we
Mhm.
call J, E, P, and D,
Mhm.
right? I mean, to make it very simple,
Right.
And you can actually identify
J,
where
E, D, and P. J-E-D. You said J-E-P-D. J-E-D, and P.
does the order is the order that
Oh, yeah.
significant?
No, it makes a big
Okay.
difference. You really want to talk about this?
Well, a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll make
yeah. Why is the order significant?
Well, because the hypothesis, this is really funny that you're asking this,
Yeah.
because the hypothesis as it was defined by Wellhausen 140 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
had the sequence was important. J and E were pretty much simultaneously, and then D, which was benchmarked at 621
That's
BC.
chronological.
And chronological,
Yeah.
and then P came later. And he tied that into the certain historical events of Israel's history, which all made sense and won the day, and everybody believed it was true. Yeah.
Well, I've heard. When I was in seminary, that was just taught as, this is what happened.
Right.
And we had a book, actually, I remember, called Sources of the Pentateuch that
Yes.
divided them out.
Yeah, I remember this book. We used it too.
And we could say, oh, well, this is the Yahweh source. That's clearly the Yahweh source.
Right.
This is clearly the priestly source, you
right.
know. And I've heard that this documentary hypothesis is sort of old news now. That
Yes.
we're not doing that anymore. We're not doing
Right.
140 years is enough.
It's enough.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true. It's yes and no. My answer to this is yes and no.
Okay.
That hypothesis, as you've just defined it, since the 1970s is now passé. There are very few people who would be
Since
strict-
the 70s.
since the 70s.
I was taught this
So
in the 90s.
Well,
I want a refund
It became you want a refund.
from my seminary
Well,
tuition.
it became dogma for a lot of people. They just
Yeah.
accepted it as true.
Yeah.
But there began to be serious questions about this in the 70s. And I would say in today's world, there are very few strict Wellhausenian scholars who would say, as you just said, that the sources are defined in that way, and they have. Now, there is such a thing, I have to say, there is such a thing as a neo-documentarian who is trying to go back to that. Their arguments are a little different, and but it's really just a handful of scholars, and they're not yet having a great influence. But
But
David,
you knew they'd get here, right?
Yeah.
Because anything that people in the academy say, someone has to say something
a
different
little
than
different.
that
Yeah,
thing.
they've redefined.
Oh, you thought the documentary hypothesis was passé? Well, guess what?
It's not.
It's
and they're
not.
arguing
It's
that
actually
it's back,
right.
and they're arguing for the same sources, but on different foundations, different rationalities.
The neo-Wellhousenians.
Neo-documentarians, yeah.
Yeah.
And a couple of my friends are there, and they're great people, but they're not winning the day. It's not, in my view, a persuasive argument.
Yeah.
Now, there are a couple of ways of talking about this, David. As Christians, we believe that you wouldn't preach J or P or D. That's not the text of the Bible. We believe in the canon, and that's what we read as authoritative and the means of grace in our lives, and that's what we preach and teach. The question of where these texts came from will always be with us. Like, you will always have to deal with whether there was a Q and whether Mark is prior to the other Gospels. I mean, this is just the question that never goes away, right?
I want to talk more about this when you're done
Okay.
because I have strong feelings.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
and we've not talked about that, so I don't know what
Yeah.
your strong feelings are.
Well,
but-
maybe I need to talk to my therapist about it. My feelings are so strong.
I think you have become my therapist in this moment right now.
Well, then you owe me $150.
Oh, take that out of my salary, I suppose. Gonna change my
Salary
mind about
deduction. Salary deduction. You heard it here first,
Okay,
folks.
let me get this back.
All right.
So we don't teach this as so. The questions never go away. The question of where these texts came from and their origins
Yeah.
are always with us in the guild and in the scholarship.
Yeah.
So there is this newer strand of Christian scholarship, which is theological interpretation,
Yeah.
and it's initially said that it doesn't matter the historical origins. We're not even
Isn't
going to talk
that
about those.
actually an older method of interpretation that's come back in vogue?
Well, that's true too. That's happened
Yeah.
again, hasn't it? But I'm thinking about the Journal of Theological Interpretation and the movement in the 1990s and early
Joel
2000s.
Green's very involved in that,
and Richard Hayes.
Yeah.
So the idea is that's not helpful. Historical criticism in general is not helpful. We're not going to talk about it. I think most people, even in that movement, now say, well, it's the question that still doesn't go away, and we can't ignore it completely. So we're still addressing it. But we understand that's a secondary question. It's a second order issue. That's one way of addressing it. But there are others who are still, so I'm going to use the term source criticism, who are still devoted to source analysis, who have different answers instead of JDP. But they're not far from it. In fact, the Guild now in Old Testament studies puts everything very late. So some challenge whether there ever was a Yahwist, ever was a J document. Many put the priestly text and even the Deuteronomistic text in the post-exilic period, in the Persian period. I mean, the degree to which we get into a ridiculous sort of theorizing is something that I have to live with. I deal with it some. Can't ignore it. But so to answer your question, that particular understanding of the sources of the Pentateuch is no longer in vogue. But it's been replaced by lots of other things which are just as challenging and require just as much mental gymnastics to get to.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And I have my own theories about the origins of the Pentateuch, which you need to talk about the synoptics, so maybe another time we'll talk about those things. But we can move on.
I want to know all about these things, Bill. When I was coming up through school, the four source hypothesis for the gospel. So that's the idea that Matthew and Luke used independently of each other, used Mark as a source.
Right.
And they also used a document that we don't have anymore. I'm saying this, I know you know this. I'm saying this for people who are watching who may not know.
Right.
They also are using a document we don't have anymore called Q. And Q was a sayings document. And so that accounts for the material, what we call double tradition material in Matthew and Luke, sayings of Jesus that don't appear in Mark. And that was just sort of taught as kind of like JEB&D, like, oh, this is what happened.
JDP. This time it was J. You got a B in
I'm
there
going
somewhere.
with the canonical order, Bill.
Okay.
So not the chronological
All right.
order.
Sorry.
All right. all you Old
Hey,
Testament.
you're the president. You just say whatever you want to say. That's going to be fine.
JEDP. I'm going to get it right. Okay.
There you go.
You heard it here first.
I see how
listeners.
much you care about these things.
The order really matters. So where were we?
You were talking about mark and authority, or
we really should have had Jessica
we
on this
should.
podcast.
She would bring us back in.
Yeah.
Priority.
So the four-source hypothesis, Matthew and Luke are reading Mark and reading Q, but they're not reading each other. Right. And I thought, this is probably, and then I remember like at one point, Hermeneia came out with the critical edition of Q.
Yeah. Like we actually have it.
And at that point, I thought, okay,
wow,
this has gone too far.
Yeah.
Right? Like no one has ever seen a copy of this document. It is entirely hypothetical.
Yep.
It's just there to fill a hole.
Yep.
Why do we have the double tradition material? Why are there places in Matthew and Luke that are identical or almost identical in wording that aren't in Mark? That even may have the same kind of grammatical errors or quirks, right? That make it look like they're using the same source.
Right.
And then I was at the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature and American Academy of Religion one year. We all go to that.
Yeah, we do.
It's this big...
It's a big nerd convention.
Big
Susan
nerd
calls it
convention. It's like Comic-Con for religion scholars.
It is.
And
see all kinds.
Yes, you do.
And hear all kinds.
So I went into a session where Mark Goodacre was presenting, and his topic was called 10 Reasons to Question Q. And I went into that session thinking there was a Q, and I walked out thinking there's no Q. Like why did I think this for so long? You know, he made such good argument. He actually had a website devoted to this. I would direct our viewers to just look up 10 Reasons to Question Q.
All right.
And I hope it's still up because I thought it was very compelling. But what that goes to show is these hypotheses, these scholarly hypotheses can be sort of interesting heuristic devices. In other words, they can help us as we kind of drill down into the text. But over the years, I've come to think of their utility as extremely limited. You know, that I remember I cut my teeth on Mark as a scholar. That's what I wrote my dissertation on. And I got to read book after book after book on Mark.
Yeah.
And they were doing redaction criticism of Mark, which means they were talking about the sources lying behind Mark.
Right.
Like this is Mark, you know, and this is pre-Markan tradition, and identifying all these different strata, talking about Mark's gospel, chronological strata, and I was reading this going,
what's this got to do with anything?
What's it? Not only that, but how do you know? Right? Like,
right.
You're just. I felt like they were just guessing a lot of the time, you know, because we don't have those sources. You can make educated guesses at this stuff.
Right.
What's the cash value of that, though? Right? Like, what's the payoff? And identifying Mark,
right,
as you know, or pre-Markan tradition. Or something like that.
Yeah, in my world, sorry, go ahead.
And in terms of the proper setting for the Bible, which is its use in the church. Right. The Bible is the church's book.
Right.
There's no Bible apart from the church.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, you secular people read the Bible.
Yeah.
But it came, I mean, the fullness of the canon came into being in and through God's agency in the church, God's agency and human agency.
So I think you're describing really the theological interpretation movement, if you can call it a movement, and I agree with that. I think that's right. In my world, it would be like someone writing a commentary on J. The closest we've come to that would be the book you mentioned, where they tore out all the pieces and said, these are the J, this is E. And you can get different sources where people do that. But again, in my world, it's ur deuteronomium, the original Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's exactly guesswork. There may be some heuristic value in interpreting as you're going through, but it's minimal. And as you say, it's guesswork. We think we know what the original Deuteronomy might have been, but it's just guesswork. And what bothers me most in the field I work in and what I do is books that I read and articles that I read where it's reified as an object and it's real
Yeah.
and taken as a fact that you can't question, and then
Right.
you move on. There's no modesty. There's no methodological modesty. David
Right.
Carr, a
Right.
friend of mine in New York, he calls it methodological modesty. So I think we have to acknowledge that even within the guild, we have to be more modest about some of our theories about these things.
Yeah.
And then for our purposes, as you said so beautifully, we're really more interested in the message of these texts for the gospel and for the church and how they play out in our lives.
Yeah. And I don't want in any way to diminish the value of scholarship.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what I've given my professional career to, scholarship in service to the church.
Right.
But it is in service to the church, and I'm pretty explicit about that, as you are as well.
Right.
And I think there is value in the Society for Biblical Literature, the Institute on Biblical Research,
Mhm.
that we
Mhm.
participate in.
Yeah.
These kinds of things are valuable. Although the IBR is a confessional
It is a
group.
confessional,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
different than the SBL,
Yeah.
But so I don't in any way want to diminish scholarship, but as you put it, the kind of reification of these theories is usually unhelpful,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
And they get taken for granted, and then they get taught in seminaries as just like, this is what
Right.
happened.
Right.
And when I was teaching, which I'm not doing anymore, I always tried to. I would start my classes and tell my students that at least 30% of what I was teaching is wrong. I just didn't know which 30% it was.
Wow. 30%, that's pretty generous.
Well, yeah, generous towards me.
Right.
Yeah. But the point of that was that I too am formed in a particular intellectual tradition, and maybe don't always see the blind spots that are connected
Right.
with that. And so that's just part of the life of being a scholar.
When I think about what you're saying just now about the guild that we move in and I'm more in it than you are nowadays, but
Yeah, that's true.
I think often of the woman at the well, because when she asked Jesus where one should worship God, you say here, we say there, it was really an illustration of diversion from the main point. And he, of course, he wasn't going to be diverted. He said, well, what about your life now? What are you doing?
Right.
And I think I go to SBL and I go to these conferences, and very much it's like these questions that we're raising are not, it's like the woman, we're dealing with sacred text, but we're asking these questions that are almost trying to get us on to something else because we don't want to talk about the meaning of the text.
Right.
We don't want that to be the object of our study. And that's always confusing to me.
Yeah.
And sad, a little bit sad.
I mean, it relates to something that when I was a PhD student, I also served in a church, and I did lots of things when I was a PhD student,
yeah.
which was why it took me so long to get my PhD.
Well,
But
also why you're so balanced if you did church work while you were doing the scholarship.
I did do that, and that was in a time where everybody was like, a lot of people in mainline churches were reading historical Jesus, popular historical Jesus stuff, the Marcus Borg, the
Right.
cross and stuff, and things like that. And I've always thought, I've always been very ambivalent about the historical Jesus work for just the reason that we're talking about, right?
Mm.
That historical Jesus work tends to, these always, like all historical research, it tends to be an exercise in presuppositions, right?
Yep.
What do you presuppose? What is allowable? So you read Marcus Borg and you think, oh, okay, Jesus was a kind of a shamanistic person who taught a politics of compassion over against a Pharisaic politics of purity, right? Yeah, oh, okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense given his historical sources he used, the way he's reading the Gospels, these kinds of things. But then, you read his book, The God I Never Knew, which lays bare some of his, and I appreciate this about him. He's transparent in terms of his own theological presuppositions.
Right.
And The God I Never Knew is basically a primer in process theology, which is a kind of theology where God doesn't really do very much.
Right. Right.
God may lure you or woo you into particular kinds of actions, but in terms of doing something like raising Jesus from the dead,
right, he's not going to do that.
No. Come on.
Right.
So
it's like studying the history of bad ideas.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just like,
yeah,
these are things not to accept.
I agree with you.
That's a lot of what we do, actually, is the history of bad ideas in some ways.
Yeah.
I know a lot about Wellhousenian thought. Well, why do I know that?
Bad ideas gives us things to talk about, like on podcasts
right.
and write about in books.
But hopefully it also helps us when we do see truth, it shines brighter if we have it against the background of the history of bad ideas.
Considering variety of ideas helps you to refine your own ideas. Yeah. But I always just thought that so much of this scholarship, was so theoretical and presuppositional, that, so I read, for example, John Dominic Crossan's giant book on the historical Jesus. I think it's called The Historical Jesus Life of a Mediterranean Jewish Peasant. Or Palestinian Jews. I can't remember
when that came out. Yeah,
the big blue book.
Yeah,
and it is in some ways, a masterful work. And thankfully, he's very transparent about the sources he uses. But a lot of the sources that he uses for important conclusions are hypothetical sources.
Yep, there you go.
So,
House of Cards.
I think so. Yeah, I think the more hypothetical sources you use, the weaker your argument becomes in very significant ways. And so, again, I'm definitely a proponent of scholarship, but I like the way that you put it. Did you say epistemological modesty?
Methodological modesty. And that's not original to me. David Carr is an Old Testament scholar at Union Seminary in New York, and he's said that in a number of places, but I've used that, and I think that's a very helpful rubric.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm going to use that, methodological modesty.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have your theories and you deal with the scholarship, but you understand that they're theories,
right?
And there are limitations to how far that takes us, in terms of understanding the message of the text.
Yeah, and my concern remains, always really has been, how does this serve the church? Not every scholar has that concern, and that's okay. I don't denigrate their work, but that's my concern, and so that's what I'm really looking for when I'm reading stuff. How does this serve the church? So, well, Jessica,
we miss
you. But I want to thank you, Bill, for coming on.
It's an honor to be here, David.
For me, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I just enjoyed the opportunity to get to talk to you. I don't know when we've had the chance to talk for this long.
We always talk about other things. Yeah. And hopefully there will be 2 or 3 other people who think it's interesting like you do. Maybe.
We'll get a couple of likes on YouTube.
Well, that's been our episode for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other people find us. And remember to subscribe to receive future episodes. We'll see you next time.